Hello, this is Henry Cooper and welcome to the Boxing Classics series. We can now trace boxing back to its roots in legendary champions, with incredible archive footage from early champions like Bob Fitzsimmons, Jess Willard and Jack Dempsey.
Way back when men were men, they always came out fighting, rough and ready, tough and steady, like a bolt of lightning, smashing and mauling, bashing and brawling in the good old-fashioned way. Scream and shout, he's down and out, all those were the days. Remember them, all the short and tall men who knew no fear. Hear the bell, fight like hell, bust him in the air. Fist and glove, push and shove, fortune and fame. Swing some more, he's on the floor, yeah, that's the fighting game. Now you know we're gonna show the men a fist of glory. Brash and bold, they will unfold a truly smashing story. From 1880 to 1930, you'll see everything. Champions, all these men we call the legends of the ring.
In 1882, the famous English writer, Oscar Wilde, came 4,000 miles to Mississippi. It cost him a boat ticket and 2 weeks' time. In 1882, the famous New York minister, Henry Ward Beecher, came 1,000 miles to Mississippi. It cost him a railroad ticket and 3 days' time. And in 1882, this infamous man came only 400 miles to Mississippi. It almost cost him his life. Wanted in 7 states, dead or alive, a $10,000 reward on his head. But Jesse James risked his life, left his hideout in St. Joseph, Missouri, rode 400 dangerous miles to the south, leaving Missouri, passing through Arkansas, down to Mississippi City, Mississippi. What drew a writer, a preacher, and an outlaw to this remote place? They all came to see the Boston strong boy, John L. Sullivan, challenge for the heavyweight championship of the world. This is the man Sullivan has to beat, bare-knuckle champion Irish Paddy Ryan. Wax on his mustache, but iron in his fists. On February 8, 1882, Irish Paddy stalked into the ring to, as he put it, dispense with this boy Sullivan. For 8 rounds, Sullivan and Ryan clubbed away at each other. Then suddenly in the 9th round, the upstart challenger smashed his fist to Ryan's jaw, and John L. Sullivan became the new bare-knuckle champion of the world. 2 months after the fight, Robert Ford shot Jesse James in the back of the head while Jesse was hanging a picture in his home in St. Joseph, Missouri. 1882. America was in the second half of a 200-year boom that would take it from a weakling colony to world power. Football had just been invented, and baseball pitchers were still throwing underhand. Boxing was illegal in most of the country, but Americans loved it. It was the spectator sport, Americana in the raw. Calling the 1882 brand of boxing a sport is really a kindness. Barely organized mayhem would be closer. Bouts were held in bar rooms, on barges, and deep in the backwoods. Wrestling and gouging were commonplace with no gloves on the hands. The brawls also had no time limits. They usually ended with the stronger man having literally disabled his opponent. And in 1882, John Lawrence Sullivan had proved that he could probably, as he put it, lick any son of a bitch in the world. At 5 foot 10 inches, he was not quite a giant, but in his first 7 years as champion, Sullivan overwhelmed all of his 23 opponents in 6 rounds or less. He drank under the table all those men he didn't fight. Here is John L. without his handlebar mustache, posed in front of his favorite hangout, a saloon. But in 1888, a threat appeared in Sullivan's rosy future. Jake Kilrain, who figured he could easily beat the rum-soaked champion. The Sullivan-Kilrain fight is the most famous bare-knuckle contest ever held. These are the first photographs ever taken of a fight. These are the only photographs of a bare-knuckle contest. These are the only visual records of John L. Sullivan in action. 23rd round, middle of the Mississippi woods. Temperature 100 degrees. The roughneck crowd didn't have to pay. All the money to be made on the fight was in the $10,000 side bet between Sullivan and Kilrain. The man with the shaved head is the world wrestling champion and Sullivan's trainer, Wild William Muldoon. Notice John L.'s gloveless right hand. By the way, they are not fighting on canvas, but on good old American dirt. 75th round. 2 hours and 16 minutes after it began, the savage fighting ends under the broiling Mississippi sun. Jake Kilrain lies on the ground, too battered to rise. The great Sullivan-Kilrain fight is over. It will be the last championship fight fought with bare knuckles. Soon after the fight, the victorious Sullivan had a surprise in store for him. It took 16 brave men in blue to arrest the feared champion for having engaged in an illegal prize fight. In 1890, at the age of 32, the champion took his fistic talents to a new arena, the melodrama stage. John L. and his handlebar mustache starred in a standing room only success called Honest Hearts and Willing Hands. Sullivan, on the left, always got to flatten the dastardly villain in the last act. As John L. moonlighted on the stage, a handsome pompadoured figure catapulted into the boxing limelight, James John Corbett, the father of modern boxing. Corbett arrived on the fight scene at an opportune time. A new set of rules, sponsored by the English nobleman, the Marquis of Queensberry, had been gradually gaining favor. The bare-knuckle era was about to end. When James J. Corbett and John L. Sullivan donned gloves on September 7, 1892, it was the start of the modern era of boxing. This crude drawing is the only record of the scene, the Olympic Sporting Club in New Orleans. No photos exist, but evidently it wasn't much of a contest. Sullivan didn't have wrestler Muldoon to get him in shape, and he looked as if he had trained for a pie-eating contest rather than a championship fight. For 20 rounds, the will-o'-the-wisp Corbett danced around the champion, waiting for the opportunity to strike. In the 21st round, with Sullivan reduced to a puffing, exhausted shell, the opening came. John L. Sullivan toppled to the floor. And James John Corbett, the man who is credited with bringing science to the manly art of fisticuffs, stood victorious over America's idol, the invincible John L. Sullivan. The newspapers trumpeted the fall of Sullivan to an unbelieving country. But almost simultaneously with the end of the bare-knuckle era, this retiring New Jerseyite inadvertently caused an equally profound change in the fight world. Thomas Alva Edison had invented the kinetograph camera, designed to take 32 still pictures a second, thus creating the illusion of motion. Edison built this black tar-papered laboratory called the Black Maria to house his camera. In this strange structure, Edison made the very first motion picture. Here it is. Edison soon found that the sneeze was looked upon as a sideshow gimmick. Being an enthusiastic boxing fan, he decided to film something of far greater public interest, a prize fight. He hired world heavyweight champion Gentleman Jim Corbett, who is facing the camera, to oppose the New Jersey champion Peter Courtney. The film of their fight, taken over 70 years ago by Thomas Edison himself, is a motion picture landmark. Notice Gentleman Jim Corbett's short shorts. Peter Courtney wears longer fighting pants. When Corbett signed his contract and was paid $4,700 for his 2 days' services, that made him the first motion picture actor ever to perform under contract. This is also the first film ever to make money. It grossed over $30,000. Edison found that nothing convinces skeptics like cash. Motion pictures had arrived as a legitimate and profitable entertainment form. Watch Peter miss with this murderously intended punch. You can't fault Courtney's enthusiasm or Corbett's wardrobe. Corbett's venture into the movies was not his only try at acting. After winning the championship, he had gone directly into the leading role of this play as it toured the country. Gentleman Jim liked showing up this weaselly villain so much that he became reluctant to enter the ring. Freckled Bob Fitzsimmons, a balding ex-blacksmith, decided he was the man to call Corbett back into the ring. Already the 150-pound world middleweight champion, he put on enough weight to take on the ranking heavyweight fighters of his day. In the winter of 1896, Fitzsimmons fought this tough cauliflower-eared sailor, Tom Sharkey. In the bout, Fitz was the victim of an unusual referee's decision. The biased referee was none other than one of the heroes of the Old West, Wyatt Earp. Referee Earp was rumored to have bet a lot of money on Sailor Sharkey. Old Wyatt may have looked like a picture hero in this pose, but when Fitzsimmons KO'd his man, Earp called it a foul, awarding the fight to Sailor Tom. Despite this setback, Fitzsimmons soon gained a chance at Corbett's title. On the eve of the fight, Bob predicted, "Pretty Jim won't last 10 rounds." This is a newspaper drawing of the fight scene. It looks like there was a standing room only crowd. Now be prepared for historical evidence of a credibility gap. The only existing photograph of the scene. Ordinarily, this miserable turnout would spell financial disaster. But in this unimposing ringside shed were 3 Veriscope cameras. Here are the movies of the Corbett-Fitzsimmons fight, the first heavyweight championship contest ever filmed. That's Corbett on the right and the balding Fitzsimmons on the left. Most men are able to wear their bathrobes only while shaving. Gentleman Jim and Ruby Robert get double use from theirs. Gentleman Jim stands ready and seemingly impatient for round 1 to get underway. The bell rings and the scheduled 25-round bout begins. In the foreground, in the derby, is the timekeeper for the fight, Bat Masterson. The old frontier gunfighter had become a fixture in the fight scene because of his undisputed effectiveness in collecting guns and knives from the spectators. 14th round. Corbett, with his back to the camera, is well ahead on points, and Fitzsimmons' nose is bleeding badly. But amazingly, the challenger is starting to press the fight. At this point, the old nitrate film starts to disintegrate. But a somewhat viewable version of the 14th round knockout was assembled from potato chip-like fragments. Watch Fitzsimmons on the right step under Corbett's left jab and land his own hard left to the champion's midsection. Gentleman Jim collapses. Corbett has evidently had the wind knocked out of him. He's still down when the referee completes the 10 count, and Fitzsimmons raises his hand in triumph. In slow motion, let's see that all again. Here comes the left hook that Fitzsimmons on the right later called his solar plexus punch. The champion goes down to his knees. He tries to crawl over to the corner of the ring to pull himself up by using the ring ropes. Meanwhile, Fitzsimmons stalks around, keeping a close watch on Corbett's progress. The referee and timekeeper Masterson seem out of sequence, but it is obvious that Corbett will not beat the count. Gentleman Jim has lost his heavyweight crown. Corbett's stocky sparring partner, Jim Jeffries, wearing the white pullover, goes to the aid of the deposed champion after the fight. Remember that name, James J. Jeffries. Fitzsimmons decided he would finally defend his title against James J. Jeffries. Jeffries had won his first 11 professional fights in a row, but he was considered slow and clumsy. Coney Island, New York, June 9th, 1899. We see Fitzsimmons on the right shaking hands with a burly Jeffries. The first attempt to film a fight indoors failed when the special lights installed in the arena blew out in the first round. For 10 rounds, Fitz belted Jeffries with all his best punches. Then, in the 11th round, Jeffries landed a ponderous left. James J. Jeffries became the new champion. Only 2 days later, a reenactment of the bout was staged. 2 actors, one visibly bald-headed, the other solidly chunky, played the principal roles. You quickly see these 2 gentlemen were devoted method actors. This recreation seems remarkably close to some of those pity-pat Western saloon brawls later staged in Hollywood. The pseudo round ends, and the referee takes the opportunity to get himself center screen in the movies. Back in the world of reality, Jeffries was demonstrating he was an uncomplicated man as well as a dogged fighter. He set about facing all the legitimate contenders. James J. first arranged to meet sailor Tom Sharkey, Wyatt Earp's old protege. Sharkey had given Jeffries a terrific battle before Jim had won the title. Their return match was the last important fight of the 1800s. It was also the first indoor fight successfully filmed. The special lights used were so hot, the fighter's hair was singed. The official movies of the fight were lost, but this version of the fight was pirated from inside a cigar box. That's right, shot with a camera that was hidden inside a cigar box. The quality isn't too clear, but you can get an idea of the scene and the incredibly bright lights. A hat of a spectator will occasionally block out the foreground. Jeffries is the larger of the 2 in the slightly darker shorts. There's the spectator's hat. Jeffries now has his back to the camera. James Jeffries eventually won by decision over Sharkey in 25 hard-fought rounds. Now meet the same 2 men 25 years later, the year 1926. Jim Jeffries and a top-heavy Tom Sharkey. They were on a vaudeville tour together and agreed to stage a minor return match in this hallway for a camera. You can see why this was a slapstick circuit favorite. The 25 years has at least not affected the 2 oldsters' enthusiasm. President Teddy Roosevelt is busy pushing through his trust-busting policies and his plans for the Panama Canal. 2 bicycle builders are regularly sending an odd-looking vehicle skyward at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. The Wright brothers have quietly inaugurated the space age. Buffalo Bill, William F. Cody, is giving out frontier greetings at his touring Wild West show. The other major entertainment attraction was this chesty, big-bustled dramatic actress, Lillian Russell. And James J. Jeffries poses in dainty pink tights, but nobody thinks of laughing. He fought both Corbett and Fitzsimmons again. He had taken on Jack Monroe twice. They had all ended lying flat on their backs, staring up through glazed eyes at the champion's impassive face. By mid-1905, Jeffries had no one left to fight. Now billed as the world's strongest human, James J. retired, leaving 2 hand-picked men to scrap for his title. This is Marvin Hart, the forgotten champion, the man who knocked out Jack Root to fill Jeffries' vacated title. No film was taken. Frankly, nobody cared. These are the stumpy legs of a precocious fighter who felt that he should be the one to follow in Jeffries' massive footsteps as undisputed heavyweight king. But at 5 feet 7 inches tall, Tommy Burns was not too imposing a figure. Still, on February 23, 1906, Tiny Tommy became the new heavyweight champion when he decisively defeated Marvin Hart in a 20-round fight. Light heavyweight champion Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, seen here with his tuxedoed valet, decided he too wanted in on the action. On November 28, 1906, just before the great Burns-O'Brien championship fight begins, the two fighters pose for the still cameras. This is the 10th round of the scheduled 20-round fight. Champion Burns, with his back to the camera, takes after the retreating O'Brien in what can only be described as the chase. Philadelphia Jack finally stops and throws a few punches. The referee will try to break the two fighters apart as they lock in a fervent clinch. The official is none other than the former champion, James J. Jeffries, who's come in from his alfalfa farm for a little action. So far, he hasn't gotten much. The 20th round. The fight has deteriorated into a wrestling match. Jeffries attempts to break another clinch, but the overweight 300-pound former champion has trouble getting the fighters apart. He gives up as the fight ends. He raises both fighters' hands to signify he considers it a draw. The ecstatic O'Brien is carried off by his handlers, while Tommy walks to his corner, completely disgusted at the decision. Only 6 months later, Burns fought O'Brien again, and this time Tommy won decisively. He posed for this picture before he moved on to meet other challengers. In Colma, California, a lady prohibition worker tries to convert fight fans outside the stadium where Tommy Burns is to meet challenger Bill Squires. A patriotic vendor is peddling tomatoes, refreshment, or ammunition. Inside the stadium, the fighters are in the ring. That's Bill Squires on the left, about to work himself into a fighting pose for the photographers. Again, the referee is stocky Jim Jeffries, who has turned overseeing fights into a lucrative sideline occupation. Round one. Announcer Billy Jordan shouts his famous, "Let her go!" Burns again is giving away 4 inches in height to his opponent. The balding Australian challenger is the 3-to-1 betting favorite because he came into this fight with the impressive record of 37 straight knockouts in 37 fights. But Tiny Tommy Burns is soon getting home with his equalizer, his booming right hand. Squires goes down, but he's right up. The crowd thinks it's just a fluke knockdown. But Australian Jack hits the deck again. The spectators are stunned at seeing their 3-to-1 favorite on the canvas. He rises, but Tommy Burns soon plays his own special version of Good Night, Sweet Prince, with some more explosive right-hand smashes. Squires is out cold, flat on his back. The count by referee Jeffries is only a formality. A most convincing victory. There is pandemonium in the ring. In the fall of 1907, the increasingly dapper Tommy took his title overseas, matched to meet the heavyweight champions of the various European countries. Round one of a title fight in London, England. Burns' corner man rubs grease on Tommy's head before he goes out to battle Gunnar Moyer, the heavyweight champion of the British Isles. As you look at this rare film, you must notice something unusual. There is no referee inside the ring. In the British Isles, fight officials were permitted to preside from outside the ring if they could maintain control of the fight. In this case, the referee is in a third-row ringside seat. The 10th round. The champion, Tommy Burns, is now definitely in charge. Moyer's face is bloody. The fight has become so rough that the referee, Eugene Corey, had to enter the ring and then remove his tuxedo jacket. Two right-hand blasts by Tommy, and Gunner goes down. Gamely, the battered challenger struggles to his feet. Now watch Tommy try to finish it. Burns gets in with a delayed action punch. Moyer crumpled. Gunner again struggles to his feet. Not to be denied, Tommy sends the Englishman reeling against the ropes. Now watch the final dynamite right hand. Wham! Tommy Burns may be small, but he's the little giant of the heavyweight division. Gunner Moyer is in no condition to beat the count. Burns has won by a smashing 10th round knockout. Tommy then rubs in his victory by donning a jaunty Bristol cap and unwinding the American flag sash he had worn around his waist. During 1908, Tommy Burns went on to Ireland, France, and Australia and decisively beat each of their champions. But the tough little champion's reign was drawing to a close. These massive arms belong to one of the most formidable fighting machines in boxing history, a man who was to stand overwhelmingly supreme above the other fighters of his era, Jack Johnson. In 1901, early in his career, a young Johnson tangled with one of the great old fighters of the bare-knuckle era, Jewish Joe Choyinski. Choyinski quickly showing the young Johnson how much he had to learn. Here we see Jack looking very sad. Choyinski had flattened him in 3 short rounds. But Joe himself doesn't look too happy about the verdict. The Galveston, Texas vigilantes had arrested both fighters for having engaged in an illegal prize fight. But Jack Johnson learned from this humbling affair. He teamed up with manager George Little and went off on an extended rampage through the heavyweight division. 7 years and 66 smashing victories later, he knew he was ready for the top. Johnson took to following Tommy Burns around the world. London, Paris, then finally all the way to Australia. There, 12,000 miles from home, champion Tommy Burns gave Jack Johnson the first chance a Negro ever got to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world. Sydney, Australia, the day after Christmas, 1908. A large crowd has assembled to see if all they have heard about the phenomenal Jack Johnson is true. On this wooden stand is the means by which the ultimate verdict would be taken to the rest of the world. The two fighters could not agree on a way to divide movie earnings, and it was finally decided that no films would be taken. But on the day of the fight, promoter Hugh McIntosh secretly arranged to set up a movie camera anyway. Round 1. Tommy Burns comes out from the near corner. He starts cautiously against a man who is already touted as the greatest defensive fighter of all time. Look at the 6-inch height difference between the two men. Johnson smiles as he ties up the champion. Ringside reporters wrote that he taunted Burns. "What you got, Mr. Tommy? You ain't showed me nothing. What you got, Mr. Tommy?" Burns doesn't seem to know how to reach his tormentor. See the referee. He's promoter Hugh McIntosh, who has never refereed before and never will again. He had to officiate because the two fighters could not even agree on a referee. The 8th round. To most of the spectators, the fight is already a foregone conclusion. In a devastating flurry, Jack Johnson shows that he can handle champion Tommy Burns like a small child. Burns is tied up, his attempts at uppercuts completely nullified. Johnson has a big grin on his face as he continues to chat in the clinches. Is you having fun, Mr. Tommy? As the bell rings, Jack gives a friendly little wave to Burns. See you later, Mr. Tommy. 14th round. Renowned sports writer Damon Runyon, who had come 12,000 miles to report the contest, was to write, "Not 1 second of any round could legitimately be scored for Burns." Finally, Johnson decides to put an end to the lopsided contest. He advances on the smaller man, and then suddenly, tiger-like, he attacks. Punches rain on the champion. Burns reels around the ring, helpless. At this very moment, the police stepped in and shut off the cameras. Seconds later, they stopped the fight. Jack Johnson was awarded the world's heavyweight championship on the spot. Back in the United States in 1909, Americans were in the throes of one of the most violent reform movements in history. In this film clip, we see the famous temperance leader, Carrie Nation, and two compatriots demonstrate their own brand of salvation, saloon busting with their trusty hatchets. Jack Johnson returned to the United States to this heated climate. He promptly scandalized the moral purists by setting up a saloon and marrying a white woman. It wasn't too long before there was a loud hue and cry for a white man to win back the title. On October 16, 1909, the first of the White Hopes came forward. Called the Michigan Assassin and often ranked as the greatest middleweight ever, Stanley Ketchel decided he was the man to dispose of Jack Johnson. The following movie is the only one in existence of the legendary Stanley Ketchel. First round. Ketchel answers the opening bell. The fight promoter, Tex Rickard, was very skeptical of signing what he correctly imagined to be a small middleweight. But Stanley Ketchel put on a pair of high-heeled cowboy boots, strutted up to the promoter and introduced himself. "Mr. Rickard, I am Stanley Ketchel, and I can beat Jack Johnson." A surprised Rickard gave him his chance to do just that. Second round. The partisan fight fans have been shouting to Ketchel to flatten the grinning Johnson. Jack has other ideas as he scores the first knockdown. But Ketchel is a champion too, and he rises to continue. Ninth round. Ketchel is still trying to solve Johnson's style. Although now only 24 years old, Stanley has been fighting full-grown men professionally since he was 16. But the heavyweight champion seems to have matters so much in hand that he will keep Ketchel on his feet when he's about to fall. As a boy, Ketchel ran with a very rough crowd, including such notorious outlaws of the time as Cole Younger and Emmett Dalton. But it was hot blood, not bad company, that would prove Stanley's undoing. Exactly 1 year after this fight, Ketchel will be dead. An irate farmer put 2 bullets into his head after Stanley seduced his daughter. 12th round. It's been Johnson all the way, but the dogged middleweight has a surprise waiting for the overconfident heavyweight champion. Ketchel gets in with one of his renowned right hands. Johnson goes down, surprised to find himself put on the canvas by this little man. He's up at 8 and attacks ferociously. Now Stanley drops like a stone. Johnson trips, but he rises quickly. The flabbergasted crowd watches the gallant middleweight counted out, lying flat on his back. Jack Johnson had Ketchel down and out only 4 seconds after he himself had been on the canvas. This dramatic victory only served to stir the cauldron of racial prejudice to greater heat. The White Hope era in boxing was only the reflection of a far more serious problem. This was a time of violently emotional reactions to racial relations. The Ku Klux Klan, active in America since the Civil War, was able to call on larger and larger membership rolls here at the beginning of the second decade of the 20th century. A mere 5 years later, the Klan would be so powerful that it would be incorporated in many states. Amid the furor, an imperturbable Jack Johnson went on in his own colorful fashion, living in high style, giving exhibitions, and playing his bass fiddle on the vaudeville stage. The golden grin of Jack Johnson became synonymous with controversy to the American public. Out of this Nevada saloon had come the promotional genius who saw in this increasingly volatile situation a unique opportunity, an opportunity to arrange one of the most famous fights in boxing history. This is ex-gambler Tex Rickard, a man who it was said could con a Scotsman into spending his life savings to see a game of marbles. Tex persuaded the one man considered invincible to come out of retirement to try to win back the title for the white race, former champion James J. Jeffries. That's James J. in the sporting cap. When the 35-year-old James J. signed to fight heavyweight champion Jack Johnson, he was committing himself to the gargantuan task of dropping 80 pounds of lard and getting in shape to go 45 3-minute rounds against one of the greatest fighters of all time. Promoter Tex Rickard always thought big. He started building the first stadium ever constructed specifically for a single sporting event. Racial solidarity was the catchword of the day as the fighters opened their training camps. Jeffries stands with former champs Gentleman Jim Corbett on the left and John L. Sullivan. In this rarest of rare footage, the two old ring giants give a mock sparring demonstration. This is the only film of John L. Sullivan that even hints of his fabled ring prowess. There had been an 18-year-old feud between the two men. Thus, the two amicable oldsters demonstrate their mutual support of Jim Jeffries by shaking hands. To help get in shape, Jeffries spars with another old-time great, old bare-knuckle battler Joe Choyinski. We see Joe wearing long white tights. And Jim Jeffries has unbelievably slimmed down to his former ring weight of 220 pounds. He once again looks like the formidable Boilermaker. The 4th of July, 1910. The streets of Reno, Nevada were in pandemonium. 30,000 people had come to see the fight being billed as the Battle of the Century. The President of the United States, William Howard Taft, was petitioned to be referee for the contest. The President reluctantly refused. Inside the stadium, champion Jack Johnson enters the ring first. He was superstitious about this point and made it a condition in all his fight contracts. Then the multitude of old hand grinder cameras recorded the arrival of the premier white hope, James Jeffries. The long-awaited fight is at last underway. Round 1. The fight will be an endurance contest in the 101-degree heat. But Jim Jeffries is stale from his 4-year layoff, while Johnson has had 4 non-title bouts this past year, including one with a fighter named Victor McLaughlin. McLaughlin later retired from the ring and went on to become an Oscar-winning Hollywood movie star. Notice referee and promoter Tex Rickard in his straw hat. Round 15. An hour has elapsed since the bout started. Jeffries sways on legs grown weary. Jack Johnson will leap in with slashing punches. The indestructible Boilermaker, James J. Jeffries, will hit the canvas for the first time in his career. The former champion slumps like a tired old man, but gamely attempts to get up. Referee Tex Rickard holds Johnson away, but Jack smashes Jeffries through the ropes. Spectators rush to lift the fallen fighter. The champion drives him across the ring, flattens him for the 3rd time. Referee Tex Rickard is counting, but the fight obviously is over. The greatest comeback attempt in the history of sports ends with Jim Jeffries humiliated in the bright Nevada sun. After the fight, Jeffries again retired to his alfalfa farm, this time for good. In later, calmer days, we see him joking with his old employer, Gentleman Jim Corbett. But the repercussions of the Johnson fight were to haunt Jeffries and the fight game for many years. As a result of race riots erupting in many cities after films of the contest were shown, Congress passed a law barring fight films from interstate commerce. For 28 years, this law prohibited Americans from seeing boxing movies. But on this peaceful country afternoon, it seems the two old friends are in a jovial mood. Jack Johnson also has his troubles. His saloon is shut down, and he is soon in money difficulties. Here, the badly out-of-shape champion resumes his training against Dynamite Kid Cutler. Cutler looks like he might have been an excellent overhand pitcher. That overhand right was thrown like a hand grenade. A few months later, Johnson signed to fight heavyweight contender fireman Jim Flynn, seen seated second from the right. Johnson agreed to let the promoters advertise the bout as a fight to the finish. Thus, the Johnson-Flynn fight is the last unlimited-length contest in boxing history. The fight, held in Las Vegas, Nevada, 4th of July, 1912, turned out to be one of the most wildly comic mismatches ever seen. This is the first round. The photographer has trouble keeping the fighters' heads in the picture. The motion picture camera still did not have a reliable viewing system. Aiming the lens was done almost by instinct. But we see Johnson demonstrate his Morse code prowess by landing a rat-a-tat-tat on Flynn's nose. It looks as though Flynn didn't get the message as he bores in again. The fifth round. Fireman Jim seems so confused by what looks like an impenetrable defense. Jack Johnson now simply holds him off with his left and belts him at will with his right. After taking a couple of extra hard Johnson uppercuts, Flynn jumps up and down trying to butt with his head. The referee warns Fireman Jim, who listens carefully. Then Jim returns to the fray. In the ninth round, Fireman Jim is at it again. Hippity-hop goes this particularly hard-headed jackrabbit. The referee again warns Flynn, but gets an argument. Suddenly, a fourth figure enters the ring. It's the Sheriff of Las Vegas. He stops the bout, awarding Johnson a ninth-round decision. Amazingly enough, 5 years later, this same fireman Jim Flynn will score a first-round knockout over a young, up-and-coming fighter named Jack Dempsey. After the Flynn fight, Johnson got into more trouble with the law than he'd ever had inside the ring. The public furor for vice reform sweeping the country came to a head over Johnson's real and imaginary out-of-the-ring exploits. Here's Jack receiving a speeding ticket, caught by an enterprising bicycle cop. Some speeder, huh? But more serious, in September of 1912, Johnson's white wife committed suicide. The outraged press howled for blood. 2 months later, Johnson was slapped with a somewhat dubious charge of having violated the Mann Act, a federal law passed expressly to nab him. Despite the fact that Johnson had married the woman, he was convicted after a short trial. Johnson chose to jump bail and flee the country rather than face jail. Here's Jack Johnson in London in 1913 with his new wife. But he didn't stay long. English authorities, concerned about harming Anglo-American relations, soon told him he was not wanted. So he packed up his new bride and went to Paris. Here they are posing in the City of Light. In urgent need of funds, Johnson fought and won 2 lackluster fights, and then signed to meet legitimate challenger Frank Moran on June 27, 1914. The French ring announcer didn't have a microphone. Rudy Valley would have been envious of this giant megaphone. The youngest referee in boxing history, 19-year-old Georges Carpentier, calls the fighters together for their instructions. The 5th round of a surprisingly close fight. Moran gets home with 2 good punches. The undaunted Johnson steps back and gives him a hearty round of applause. By the 12th round, it is obvious that Johnson was having trouble against the young challenger. Frank goes stumbling through the ropes in his eagerness to get at the tiring champion. Jack Johnson has constantly had to call on all his defensive skills to offset the aggressiveness of Moran. 20th round. Johnson holds a slight lead on the scorecard of the only official, 19-year-old Georges Carpentier. The fight ends, and Carpentier declares Johnson the winner and still heavyweight champion of the world. Back in the U.S., the quest for a white hope has built to a fever pitch. This skinny-legged 19-year-old Tanktown brawler named Kid Blackie was not even considered. But later, as Jack Dempsey, he would completely outshine all the momentary sensations of these turbulent times. The man eventually to get the call was a more impressive figure. Jess Willard, a 6'6" giant from Pottawatomie County, Kansas. Willard had been a circus strongman until he was 30 years old. Then flamboyant fight manager Tom Jones, seen here with Jess, nicknamed him the Pottawatomie Giant and persuaded him to enter the fight game. Jess started training with but one thought in mind, a championship bout. Willard was not a clever boxer, but his immense strength and fantastic endurance made him a formidable opponent in those days when a fight could go as long as 45 3-minute rounds. 1915. A chubby Jack Johnson had run out of his money and his welcome in the war clouds that were inundating Europe. He agreed to fight Willard in Havana, Cuba. Here are Johnson and Willard being introduced in Havana 1 week before the fight. Johnson appears a dapper world traveler compared to farm boy Willard in his Sunday best suit. The timekeeper for the upcoming fight takes a bow. It's none other than Bat Masterson, the fabled Western gunfighter and marshal. As you can see, he must have used a toupee for his TV appearances. The morning of April 5th, Johnson, as usual, enters the ring first. At this time, Jack Johnson had not set foot in the United States in 3 years. Jess appears a fearsome figure dressed all in black. This is the man that an estimated 40 million Americans will be rooting for while getting telegraphed round-by-round accounts of the forthcoming battle. In 1915, the fighters were required to weigh in just before the fight. The scales confirmed the expected 60-pound difference between champion and challenger. Another old-time custom, putting the gloves on in the ring. On Johnson's right is Sam McVeigh, another all-time great Negro heavyweight. The two men shake hands for the cameras, and one of the most controversial encounters in boxing history is about to begin. This is a still photograph of the scene at Havana Racetrack as it appeared during the fight. Not until 1967 was the complete version of the actual fight films discovered. As you watch, see if you believe that one of these two men threw the fight. The first round. The fight starts calmly, both men aware that they may have to go 45 rounds in the sweltering tropical sun. Temperature at ringside, 103 degrees and rising. The bout was originally to be held in Mexico City, with Pancho Villa providing the money. Adverse developments in the Mexican Revolution forced the fight to be moved here to Cuba. Now see the fighters photographed by a special close-up camera. This is the first time film was taken from first row ringside. You can see a corner water bucket and a spectator's head in the foreground. Round 10 from a camera facing the grandstand. Johnson is showing the skeptics that he's still the best boxer in the world, scoring in flurries to gain a commanding point lead. But this fight is becoming an endurance contest, with conditioning the decisive factor. Johnson, in his 7th year as champion, second only to Sullivan in longevity, does not have time on his side. The 26th round. Already this is the longest fight ever held in the heavyweight division under Marquis of Queensberry rule. Willard is watching closely, realizing that his chance to reverse the momentum of the fight may come shortly. Suddenly, Jess lashes out with a ponderous right. Johnson goes down. Referee Jack Welch counts, but the champion doesn't move. 8, 9, 10. Jess Willard is the new heavyweight champion of the world, scoring a convincing 26th round knockout. The partisan crowd goes wild. They surround Willard. Now in slow motion, let's rerun this never-before-seen film of the actual knockout punch. Willard feints, then gets in with that explosive right. Johnson, crumpling, tries to pull Jess with him. Willard catches himself on the ropes and steps back. At first, the champion's legs are bent, but then they slip down as the champion passes out cold. Not even a muscle twitches as referee Welch completes the full count. Because of federal laws, no films of this fight were shown in the United States. Only this still photograph was seen by the American public. And ego-stung Johnson, despondent at losing the title he had held for 7 years, used this photo to justify the claim that he had thrown the fight to Jess Willard. Jack said he was shading his eyes as he lay facing the bright Cuban sun. In 1920, Jack Johnson ended his lengthy exile and at long last returned to the United States. Here he gives himself up to Federal Deputy Billy Mitchell at the Mexican border 8 years after he had jumped bail. Following what proved to be an embarrassingly triumphal cross-country railroad trip, Johnson was placed in Leavenworth Penitentiary for 1 year. While there, he held press conferences, gave exhibitions, and posed with his proud jailer. That's the warden in the white shirt. When released, Jack Johnson happily resumed his vaudeville career. He leads a jazz band in a style Duke Ellington could never emulate. In 1946, near the end of his life, Johnson plays the role of an Ethiopian general in a production of the opera Aida. Back in 1916, Willard began his heavyweight championship reign under the onus of Jack Johnson's false claim that Jess had won a rigged fight. Willard's first title defense in 1916 was a successful but uninteresting 10-round decision over the boxing veteran Frank Moran. Soon, however, boxing would go into a state of suspended animation. The reason? A spectacle bigger than any sporting event could provide was in the middle of its 4-year run in Europe. The First World War was approaching a climax, and 1917 drew American doughboys into European trenches. In the pitch-in spirit of the time, former heavyweight champion Gentleman Jim Corbett, now a well-preserved 50 years old, put on khakis and boots to make an Army training film on the manly art of self-defense. His balding opponent is Kid McCoy, who'd been the first light heavyweight champion when that division originated back in 1901. The two former greats give their own priceless advice as to how to beat the German armies. In slow motion, let's see Corbett's tricky pirouette again. Luckily, by the end of 1918, this advice became unnecessary. The war had ended. The leaders of the four victorious powers met to decide peace treaty terms. Orlando of Italy, Clemenceau of France, Lloyd George of Great Britain, and Woodrow Wilson of the United States. Meanwhile, an ecstatic America returned to its traditional enjoyment of sports and fun with renewed zest and optimism. Master promoter Tex Rickard decided it was time to find an exciting new challenger for Jess Willard's heavyweight crown. His choice? This smiling young knockout puncher, Jack Dempsey. All sorts of stunts were arranged to get young Dempsey into the public eye. One most notable was this high-priced totem pole of talent. On the bottom, Charlie Chaplin, the most brilliantly inventive comedian of his time. Next is Douglas Fairbanks Sr., virile leading man who will grace swashbuckling silent films for years. On top, young Jack Dempsey, who will go on to create his own legend as the Manasseh Mauler. In a classic non-sequitur film sequence, the three men team up for a slapstick vignette. Chaplin seems involved in the music. Fairbanks comes flying to the picture. Now Dempsey joins the melee. It's a fight to the finish. But for really effective build-up, Dempsey's explosive in-the-ring style made him his own best press agent. In the 7 bouts Jack fought before he took on Willard, he had 7 knockouts, all in 2 rounds or less. With Dempsey as colorful challenger, promoter Rickard proceeded with arrangements for the fight. Tex had an immense wooden stadium built in Toledo, Ohio, to house the huge crowds he expected. The cost? $100,000 worth of green lumber. As it turned out in the hot sun, the sap from the unseasoned wood ruined many a spectator's double-breasted suit. 8 a.m., the 4th of July, 1919. The first fans arrived for the fight to be held that afternoon. Ticket prices were high, particularly since the average American makes just $10 a week. That means many of these fans put in 6 weeks of work for their ringside seats. 2,000 women, including actress Ethel Barrymore, are seated in a special section fenced off by barbed wire. This forever ended the custom of all male fight crowds. When Dempsey comes in the ring, the temperature is a torrid 112 degrees. Willard arrives, gracefully acknowledges the crowd's enthusiastic welcome. The symbolic heavyweight championship belt is displayed. The fighters meet in the center of the ring to pose for the cameras. Jess Willard does not seem to be in the rock-hard shape he was against Jack Johnson 4 years earlier. But what a difference in size between champion and challenger. Moments before the opening bell, Dempsey rubs rosin on his feet. First round. The bell rings, but no one hears it because of the clamor of the crowd. Jess Willard stands confused, looking around. There's a second bell. The most exciting first round in heavyweight history is underway. The fight starts calmly, but keep an eye on Dempsey. Although outweighed by almost 80 pounds, he has bet $10,000 at 10-to-1 odds that he will knock the champion out in the first round. Four dynamite punches, and Willard is down for the first time in his 8-year career. The crowd surges to its feet. When the champion rises, Dempsey leaps after him, drives Jess toward the ropes. Willard goes down for the second of what will prove to be 7 knockdowns. Dempsey pounces to the attack again, rains punches on the floundering champion. There was no neutral corner rule in 1919, and Dempsey is allowed to stand over the fallen fighter, ready to swing as soon as both knees leave the canvas. A crashing blow to the ribs sends Jess down again. Willard desperately tries to fend off the raging challenger. Dempsey lands more brutal punches. The champion staggers across the ring. He's down again. The referee pushes Dempsey away. Willard pulls his battered body erect, only to be floored for the 7th time. Referee Ollie Picord is counting over the incredibly game champion. The bell rings, saving Willard from a first-round knockout, but no one hears it because of the fantastic uproar. Dempsey leaves the ring thinking he has won the championship and his 10-to-1 side bet, a $100,000 payoff. Meanwhile, Willard's handlers attend to him, desperately trying to ready Jess for the second round. With jaw broken and 2 ribs cracked, the battered champion is led to his corner. Dempsey's manager, Jack Doc Kearns, runs over and starts screaming after the young fighter. "Jack, come back! Jack, come back!" Dempsey returns and the fight continues. The mammoth Willard not only lasts through round 2, but he's still on his feet here in round 3. Dempsey is relentless on the attack, but in the blazing Toledo sun, Jess Willard is proving what is meant by the saying, he went out like a champion. After the 3rd round, Willard's handlers insist that he not answer the 4th round bell. Jack Dempsey forges an instant legend as the Manasseh Mole. He has won the heavyweight championship in one of the most savage battles in ring history. In 1921, after 2 successful but unexciting defenses, Tex decided to put Dempsey against a genuinely popular challenger, the light heavyweight champion of the world, Frenchman Georges Carpentier. And one of the most successful promotions in the history of boxing gets underway. Tex Rickard immediately sets about building another of his green lumber arenas in Jersey City, New Jersey. First World War hero Carpentier arrives in the United States by boat. The newspapers play up the Frenchman's matinee idol's looks, as well as his potent right-hand punch. Here, in a publicity gimmick, George does some fancy footwork. Then the Orchid Man gallantly offers an open shot at his chin, and counts himself out. Dempsey, on the other hand, was portrayed as the villain of the piece. The champion's lack of a war record became the springboard for all kinds of adverse publicity. Here, Jack spars with Midget Smith, future bantamweight champion of the world. David and Goliath obviously had nothing on this mismatch. July 2nd, 1921. Police reinforcements arrive at the stadium at Boyle's 30 acres. Inside, Carpentier enters the ring to receive an hysterical ovation from the keyed-up crowd. The heavyweight champion of the world arrives with his entourage. A ferocious-looking Jack Dempsey with 2 days' growth of beard. Meanwhile, incredulous tellers were totaling the gate receipts. The total was $1,800,000, the first $1 million gate in boxing history. The two men shake hands for the cameras. Round one. The fight starts 2 hours earlier than scheduled. The wooden stands were filled to overflowing by noon, and Tex Rickard became worried that they would collapse before he got the fight underway. The Dempsey-Carpentier fight was the social event of 1921. The list of people who attended reads like a society and entertainment world who's who. Rockefeller, Ford, Vanderbilt, Whitney, Gould, Harriman, Baruch, Astor. Flo Ziegfeld of Follies fame was there. So was John Ringling of the Circus, Colonel Jacob Rupert of the Yankees, George M. Cohan, Al Jolson. It was the in place to be on July 2nd, 1921. Dempsey, as usual, is pressing the fight, using his greater weight and power. Round two. Carpentier gets home with his best weapon, his potent right hand. Dempsey is hurt. The crowd goes wild as George tries to press his advantage. American fight fans across the country were listening to the fight on the first live coast-to-coast radio hookup. They heard how the granite-jawed champion survived. Fourth round. Dempsey has taken charge. George misses with a desperate flurry. Dempsey is after him. A sharp left-right and Carpentier is down. The Frenchman looks like he's out cold, but jumps up at 9. 2 more punches and George is down again. This time he does not rise. The Manasseh Mauler has knocked out his 11th opponent in a row. Black Ulan, Max Schmeling. The Boston Gob, Jack Sharkey. The Handling Out, Primo Carnera. The Livermore Lariper, Max Baer. The Cinderella Man, Jim Braddock. The Brown Bomber, Joe Louis. The Acknowledged Great. And the highly controversial champions that span the years to this very day. Someday, in the distant future, perhaps they too will become legendary champions.